Welcome to Retention Chronicles, the retention podcast for e-commerce marketers. I'm your host and fellow e-commerce marketer, Mariah Parsons. Tune in as I chat with e-com founders and operators all about customer retention. Think marketing, ops, customer success, and customer experience. We cover it all and more, so get ready to get real with retention. Here is our newest episode. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Retention Chronicles. John, thank you so much for being here with me today. I'm so excited for today's episode. It is going to be a great one. Say hello to our listeners, give them a background on who you are before we really dive into it, because I know it's going to be a good one.
Hey, Mariah. Yeah, thanks for having me on. And hello, everybody. I'm John. I've been working in the supply chain and systems world for over a decade, and actually started out my career at SpaceX before jumping into the world of e-commerce. Born and raised Southern California.
Love it. Love it. Okay, so tell us a little bit about like why you wanted to get into e-commerce. Was it just something you found interest in? Was it like, okay, right place, right time, right opportunity? Because it's always a fun, just a little bit to hear about how you landed in the seat that you're currently sitting in.
Yeah, while I was at SpaceX, I got very inspired by the caliber of the people and their entrepreneurial nature overall, just as employees and in that world. And in networking more and more in LA, I started meeting more and more founders and actually started hosting these like micro festivals in Mexico, in Baja California, just bringing founders together to uh, build relationships in a very authentic way that then fed their business goals and networks. We called that Beyond the Wall. And then in doing that, I met one of the two co-founders of Seed Health. And so it wasn't really actually e-commerce that pulled me in. It was the science of the microbiome. And so in listening to him and learning about all the insane future potential of bacteria and how they are everywhere inside and outside of us, that sounded or resonated with me in a very similar way to space exploration as a like a logical and exciting next career jump, and that's how they pulled me in.
Okay. Okay. So interesting. So our listeners will know this, but I study neuroscience. So my background is not in marketing. I was eventually going to go to med school, and then I was like, not the right decision for me. So found myself in e-commerce, um, just by way of opportunity and interest. And so very, very interesting to me when people, some type of science draws them into something, because it is very much still close to home for me. And so then tell us about how you went from meeting the co-founders of Seed, and Beyond the Wall was the events you were doing, you said, right?
Yeah,
Do you still
yeah,
do
that's what
those
we called it.
events, side note, or?
No, we did it for 3 years, and then COVID kind of shut it down.
Mm.
We in-person gatherings weren't a thing anymore, but they were very fun, and had a good time doing that. And yeah, I think just culturally, I achieved some like 4 year seniority at SpaceX, or had done quite a lot in a very short period of time, and wanted to see what I could do um, as more of a driver of the machine instead of a cog in a really large machine that SpaceX was at that point. And so, yeah, the founders of Seed took a big bet on me, and I took one day off between those jobs. And to their credit, I think the world of microbiome and like health and helping humans on planet Earth felt a little more engaging and purposeful than building rockets to escape Earth. So so that like kind of drew my heart in a bit more. And also just this like ever since college, I'd had an entrepreneurship minor and wanted to really understand like how do you create something out of nothing. And they really offered that opportunity of like, hey, we've raised some cash. We don't really have much of a team, and we need to build the whole operation and supply chain from the ground up.
Yeah. So that's then how you got into the supply chain world, really sparked your interest there. I'm assuming, correct?
I was doing really technical supply chain work at SpaceX already, actually. So
Okay,
I was in
gotcha.
charge of like outsourcing and manufacturing the entire like landing legs assembly that SpaceX uses to catch their rockets for the first time, stuff like that. So it was already like something I was learning quite a lot about, but then to apply it to how to ferment living organisms and get them all the way to a customer's belly was a very different problem set.
Yes, yes. Okay, okay, gotcha. Now I'm all I got it all straight. So that's great. I can't wait to dive into all of it with you and just see like the differences across industries. Because I think it's something that is, supply chain, I think it is one of those words that a lot of people, unless you're in it, they're like, what factors go into it? How do you even like try and see like on a global scale, like what's going to affect the supply chain? And I know it obviously has affected e-commerce in the past couple of years and COVID and all the just global factors, right? So like, I know we're going to dive into it. But I want to make sure we also just share with our listeners a little bit about your VC background, just because I think it'll give some nice context, and then we'll dive into, the supply chain things. So.
Sure. Yeah. So we grew Seed Health really fast over about 3.5 years. And then I felt like it was a good time and place to backfill my many hats in the organization after a large Series A round of fundraising. So I left Seed at the end of 2021 and uh, pretty deep into COVID had already started forging what we call Venice Ventures, which is our venture studio or incubator in e-commerce services and software solutions, where we just saw a growing opportunity of all of our close friends building more and more consumer product companies and being very close to those problems and very like first principles about what problems could be best solved with some degree of manual services all the way to automated SaaS. And then in the last couple of years, we've seen the whole AI boom explode on top of that, which has been a really well-timed technological innovation for us. So yeah, so started that, and we've now launched 4 different companies that are really exciting. And I've chosen to go full-time CEO on Pelagic, the third of those 4 companies, to keep working on these supply chain problems.
Okay, great. Perfect segue into telling us more about Pelagic. So give our listeners the kind of foundation, the boilerplate, so that they have that context going into the broader conversations about what you've seen and your expertise.
Yeah, so everyone here, if they're building a brand or selling a product, like all of that, they understand, I hope, is manufactured or made somewhere in the world, right? To then it's very different than software. You're actually creating physical goods that need to get in the hands of real people. And there's a lot of very unique problems that come with that. And to your point, Raya, that there's a lot of problems that came up or became very apparent during COVID. And so COVID was the first time that supply chain became mainstream. People realized and saw entire sectors of the world shut down in terms of manufacturing capacity or capabilities. Personally, we had tons of new consumers and customers show up wanting subscriptions with Seed during that period. And I kind of tracked the entire pandemic affecting every layer of my supply chain as it spread around the world, from China to Europe to the tri-state area in the US. And so it really impacted our ability to keep our subscription customers happy and getting enough probiotics to maintain their health and during a scary time. So I think after going through that and realizing there were very few expert resources or any like solutions out there to help me kind of navigate those challenges, Pelagic is very much aiming to be that white glove, all-encompassing dream service for brand builders that either have no clue what they're trying to do with that word supply chain, or have very specific tactical problems that are acute for their business that they need solved.
Yeah. Okay. So great. So let's start off the conversation with just generally speaking about, and we'll use brands that are, brands just as a whole. So we'll group kind of all brands, whether it's they're just starting out and they, like you said, don't know what the heck they need to be doing about their supply chain, all the way to encompassing brands that are like, I know what, our supply chain is currently, for some reason it needs to change, or I want to see if I can change it. So for right now, we're just going to lump them together and tell us about like, how does a brand even try and approach modernizing the processes or the processes around a supply chain, around their supply chain, because it can be so, like you just said, like there's so many different elements, where it's like, okay, what's happening in Europe? How is it going to affect the States? How is it going to affect Asia? All of that, depending on, of course, where your manufacturers are.
Yeah, one of my favorite parts of the whole building of Pelagic experience is that there are very few companies like us out there. So it is fairly innovative in terms of trying to create a standard uh, health bar for supply chain, right? Like, what is the standard market rate for your 3PL distribution costs and services? What is the typical cost for this type of packaging that I want to use and buy? Like that stuff is very difficult to find and or does not really exist as a reference point for founders. And I think there are a lot of, to your point, like more complicated or nuanced things to evaluate when you're starting to compose or put together the stack of outsourced or insourced systems that you need to consistently produce your product that you're selling online, right? Um, I think there's a lot of fun discussions we can get into on kind of that make versus buy analysis that I would call insourced versus outsourced. But I would say we do work with a lot of companies or venture groups or influencers who come to us with just an idea. They say, hey, my audience really likes this type of product. I'd love to make it here. It needs to look this way or feel this type of premium. Like, where would I start? How would I begin to deconstruct this product as I envision it? And who can you find me to help me make it and move through all of the necessary steps to, let's say, make it in a high quality way, ideally cheaply for high margin and quickly.
Yeah, all the things that people want, right? Like high quality, but still able to be profitable. Um, I would love to. We can put a earmark in going through insource and outsource because I would love, and I know our listeners would really value it, to kind of pick your brain about that. And before we do that, one comment that came to mind for me was even as consumers are thinking about and brands are thinking about like what is my brand presence, what's the brand mission, how is it tying into what products I'm creating or selling, of like all like packaging. You gave that example, right? There's so many different things that people can do with packaging now. Do you have it branded? Is it unbranded because that's cheaper? What materials do you want it to be out of? What tags, if you're selling, something, if you're selling a product, what tags need to be on that product, what labels, all of that, right? And so it totally makes sense that the degree in which someone would want maybe not the quote unquote standard process that one manufacturer would have of like, okay, well, this is just the way we do it for all products, no matter what, is important to your brand of say you want 100% paper mailer versus poly mailer, all those little details. It makes sense that there's just no, like, how does someone or even an influencer, a founder, where do they
Yeah.
even go to start? It's just like
Where do you begin?
madness.
Where do you end? Yeah, and everyone wants the most innovative new format, but they're kind of worried of if our consumers even going to like this, how they're going to take it, right? Yeah, I think the other thing that may not be apparent to you, and I think certain founders that have tried this themselves for a while will like really, it'll really resonate with is not only is it kind of chaotic and you're not really sure where to start or like where or who can be most helpful to you, but there are these really let's say unfortunate byproducts for how the landscape of the best suppliers in the world and in the nation operate. They don't tend to have sales teams, or they have very under-resourced sales teams if they are a really high quality, great to work with manufacturer. And it's because they're delivering and they're doing great work and they're focused on the manufacturing part of their service. So they just kind of get all the clients they need via these referrals or like teams like us that know they exist. And that's very hard for a founder to like Google search and go find the best in class gummy manufacturer in the US that has capacity and is willing to bet on them and their idea and their small volume to scale, right? So um, I think on top of that, there's a lot of like discordance or noise. There's a lot of middle folks that are brokers or trying to convince you to go sign up with certain manufacturers or supply chain partners that are not necessarily good for your business or what you're trying to do and can be really high risk and really, really expensive to undo. Either in the short term, when that manufacturer just like kicks you out and is not going to work with you anymore because you're too small, or in the long run when you're trying to grow and they just deprioritize you and won't run your product fast enough and your customers lose interest and cancel, right? So I think that the stakes are very high in terms of like the pain threshold of selecting and working with the right set of supply chain partners, and knowing what you can and can't ask for, I think is a big part of like the educational process we do. And we are trying to stay as a service extremely agnostic and extremely focused on what the brand owner needs. So like there's a lot of these service providers want to give us kickbacks or give us like make us more of their sales team, and it's like no, we're gonna kind of agnostically objectively evaluate what's best for this brand, this product, this company, and present our analysis and results, and then try to just enable those founders to make very informed decisions for how they're building their business, their product, their supply chain.
Right. So yeah, instead of viewing partnerships with the different elements or different manufacturers or different different partners on one side, focusing instead on making sure that you're partnering with the brand and being like, okay, agnostically, this is who we're going to recommend based off of what you've told us and based off of what we know.
Yeah, all
um
incentives, you know.
yeah, no, I think that for anyone who's tried to either investigate or is currently investigating or is in the midst of changing manufacturers or questioning manufacturers, I think they will understand the difference of having third party kind of like middlemen, brokers, like you said, versus working directly with the factory, seeing, like, are they going to take a gamble on me because I'm starting out or XYZ reason. So I want to go into, and I want to have you tell us a little bit more about the in-source versus outsourced, because I think it'll lend itself really well to this conversation.
Yeah, I think that's been one of the more surprising and fun parts of our service that's evolved and developed. I wasn't expecting. I've been a lot of my experiences in managing outsourced partners, but I also had a lot of fun seeing how many different, unique, amazing manufacturing capabilities there are in the US at SpaceX and beyond, and then internationally for Seed. So um, we now have a fair number of our clients that have chosen to invest in owning their own manufacturing processes or build and operate and run their own distribution warehouses instead of working with that third party logistics provider 3PL services, right? And that is a very good idea at the earliest and at the latest stages is my general recommendation or advice to everyone. We have definitely seen really innovative or brilliant founders kind of realize that some component of their manufacturing is so critical to their success or their differentiation or their innovation strategy that they need to have that capability in-house to keep iterating on it or to protect it from a IP perspective. Like that I totally buy into. But my general recommendation is at the earliest stages, you can be doing things out of a garage or out of your house or out of some small piece of real estate on a shipping and distribution and customer generation perspective and management perspective. But then from the 500K in sales to 100 million in sales, you probably need to be fully outsourced on to scale fast and properly enough with these partners that are oriented towards being very good at a niche or a single key step of that supply chain. And then we have a couple customers north of 100 million in revenue that come back to us and say, hey, we see a lot of opportunity for what we're paying our 3PL to actually just go rent our own warehouse, staff it with a bunch of people, and ship our products in custom, on brand, perfect ways that we want to control now. Like, can you help us design that footprint? Tell us how many people we need to staff to operate it, track the costs to actually run that piece of our supply chain, and help implement from there.
Yeah, I like that distinction, and I think it'll help people a lot of like knowing, okay, what size brands are you talking about when when you're saying, okay, in-house versus outhouse, and then maybe coming back to, right, like you said, when you get to that point where you're big enough, 100 million, then it might just make sense to bring it back in-house. And so can you give an example, or do you have an example of what type of product, like when you're talking about something that you can make in your garage, are there any like fun examples that come to mind of, founders, either list them by name or not, but
Yeah.
are there any of like, because right, it's like something that you would maybe see on Shark Tank of like, I started this in my garage and then it grew, and then you got to the point where you maybe need to go on Shark Tank and get an angel investor. So yeah,
Yeah,
were there
yeah,
any? Yeah,
a bunch actually. Like
not
I get
surprised.
that we're working with like right now. We're finishing up one really awesome project where a very unique like supplement of these like I call them like chews because they're not quite gummies, but they have this really nice texture and they have a very fantastic benefit. And I'll keep it very vague for the client, but we walked around a shared kitchen that they were producing all these in Harlem in New York, and it was crowded and hot and like they couldn't standardize any processes, but they were just producing enough of this to get it to their customers who were loving the effects. And we helped them kind of define all that production work and the formulas and the ingredients and translate it to a whole new dedicated space in Colorado to have their own staff, to be running their own manufacturing environment, and to be able to ship and scale the way they wanted to. We're going to go visit in like 2 weeks, and it's going to be great. So that's a really exciting one. And then we're also that's kind of like transitioning and scaling in-house manufacturing. Another great example of that kind of growth curve is we have a really wonderful client who has like a children's squeezable sunscreen, and she's been shipping it to all of her customers out of her house for a long time and is now ready to let someone else do that. And we're helping her find the right outsourced third-party logistics provider to do so.
Okay, cool. So this lends itself really nicely into trying to parse out when it is that right time. With the example that you just gave of the squeezable sunscreen, someone has been managing their own logistics, their own fulfillment in-house. And how do you all recommend that brands start to then, outsource that supply chain? Where do you even look to, like start to apply the lessons of like, what does a supply chain outsourced look like? What does it look like for the updates that a team has to make internally, or the adjustments that they have to make? Because as you know, our good chunk of our listeners are at that stage or approaching that stage or will be at that stage soon. So I think it'd be great to hear like kind of like breaking down, okay, you're ready, you're at that point. What step do you do? A, B, C, D.
Yeah, yeah. So it's a great question. I mean, the place I have to highlight that we start with is just we have an amazing team, right? So
Mm-hmm.
our team is very experienced. They each have either like run or been in like built like multi-hundred thousand square foot warehouses, or have like been these boots on the ground, or know intimately how 3PLs are run, or they have been inside and worked on the supply chains in these manufacturing operations. Like they have very good foundational experience and background to be able to tell you what to look for, what to worry about, where to start. Um, After that, after we kind of find the right fit of team members to work on your problems, we tend to categorize how we approach or service those problems into either like, is it a fix of your supply chain and your product, or is it a fix of your systems and your company? And that's an important delineation, because sometimes you might have the right partner in terms of how you're working with your warehouse, or you might have the right warehouse for what you need, but actually it's like the signals that you're sending the warehouse from your company that's making things really hard, or making them very frustrated, or making things very expensive. And so we have to bifurcate those to say, okay, it could be a quick fix to say, let's go find you a 3PL that does this, this, and this. But actually, we also want to go check on how you're working with them and help you fix that piece of your company so that this solution works in the long run. Um, I think one thing I'll just also highlight is like in the ability to change those systems in your company, we found ourselves being pulled in to like the founders would then say like, well, how about you Pelagic, can you just do it? And we were like, maybe at first. And now about half our clients, we are their only supply chain operational team members as in a fractional way, running and managing and working with their entire network of their suppliers on their behalf.
Okay, I see. So like that white glove experience that you were, you said at the top of the call of really being
Yeah.
like, here's the recommendations, but okay, we can also be the ones to
A
go
lot
do
of
it.
founders were frustrated and or surprised to hear like they were like, oh, so like everyone just tells me what I need to do. They do the analysis, I pay for all the work, and they give me a solution, but then I have to go implement it, and I'm spread 15 different ways. Like I don't know enough, and I can't go do it. But we really love actually being the implementers of those solutions. Like we're not going to ever propose something we couldn't go do ourselves on your behalf, which I think is
Yeah.
a cool way to like walk the walk. It's not like, oh yeah, you should buy $100,000 piece of automated laser guided machinery. Good luck. It's like, no, okay, hold on. Like we'll meet you where you're at and make sure we're giving you solutions that are going to work.
Yeah, that's actually I very much relate to that because that is how Malomo was founded. And so years ago when, it was a white glove service, and we still do that, but there's obviously also a self-service, option for those who are like, you know what, actually no, I know exactly what I'm doing. I just want to get in there and do it myself. But like I very much relate to that and I've seen that across founders who are like, I am not the expert and I'm not shy to admit that I'm not the expert. So like please help me do this because I understand it's important. That really resonates with me of just seeing like, okay, walk the walk, be the experts in the space of make these recommendations, but then being able to implement it really it goes a long way with founders, as I've seen as well. So I love to hear that. I want to so we've been talking obviously about like implementation of changes for supply chain, but I want to talk about upcoming trends in procurement as well because I know it's something that is going to be it's always top of mind, but um especially as we're recording right now, we're approaching the holiday season. It's 2 weeks away, which is crazy. But when everyone else is hearing this episode, it'll be in the new year. It'll be end of January. And so like I know everyone who is sitting in that founder or that brand operator seat is going to be like, okay, new year, what are we doing?
Yeah.
What systems are we operationalizing or optimizing? What new techs are we onboarding? What new agencies are we onboarding? All of that, right? Like the whole year in a snapshot. So it's always interesting to hear trends, especially in something that is, I don't want to say fickle, but I'm going to use that, like something that is potentially fickle as supply chains, procurement, and just
Yeah.
it's impacted by a lot of different factors.
Yeah, you have to remember the supply chain work cycle is kind of 3 to 4 months ahead of the major sales cycles, right? So we did all of our Black Friday, Cyber Monday planning in like July, August, or
Yeah.
tried to be very proactive with our clients on that front. You'll also see a lot of the big retailers go make all of their buys from the brands they're working with in that August, September timeframe, getting ready for this moment. For those of for the founders listening in January, it might be too late, but the thing we're preparing for now is obviously Chinese New Year. And I think it will be an especially interesting Chinese New Year in many different ways. And we don't need to get ultra political, but I cannot tell you how many different people are reaching out to us about uh, Trump tariff terrors.
Yeah.
Just like, so everyone is worried about the impact of tariffs on their global supply chains. And China's like got the biggest target on its back in terms of those tariffs. I'm sure there will be tariffs applied on other international trade routes on companies trying to sell into or do business in the US. But I think one of the fun parts of supply chain is like there's all these problems that you can control within how you're running things, and then there's a whole other set of problems you can't control that you need to try at least have backup plans or be proactively ready for. And so that wave of tariffs is a very interesting one that will have short and long-term impacts. I think one that founders aren't totally thinking of that should make their considerations even more urgent is the barriers that tariffs create, even if you can hypothetically get around them in some way or reduce the impacts of that cost, are still going to reduce the total volume of economic transactions between China and the US so much so that the collective freight costs between those countries are going to be drastically more expensive for everyone. So
Hmm.
just because way less units are going to be shipped, you need to be thinking about how and where you're going to be manufacturing or buying things from different places in a just in case way. So that's like my doom and gloom, how things are going to be a little bit different on the procurement world. And then I'd say the one I'm more excited about or that we are actively tracking is this like very fast moving, sometimes in a scary way, a world of AI. And just that we're seeing that humans are really important to negotiate and do business with each other and do the human parts of interactions. But once you have a supply chain that's set up and the terms and the rails of that engagement are standardized, um, you should over time be able to really do the math that says, here's my demand, here's what I need. Like, dear AI, go execute and like move the pieces in between to ensure my orders and components and procurement strategy is humming and working. So, I think we would love to be a team and a service that delivers efficiency on that scale of some AI chatbot that is your procurement agent. I've seen a couple tools in the space that are trying to build their software around the ability to do that, if not already. And that's something I would be maybe in the same way you're seeing customer service and the agentification or all these agents being integrated on the CX side of company operations. I think procurement's a pretty low hanging fruit entry point for AI in the world of supply chain.
Yeah. So it's fascinating. It's some of that like future reading of like, we don't know what's going to happen, but here's how to try our best to be prepared, like you said. Are there like resources that you'd recommend to brands who are like, okay, I need to get up to date. I need to get literate on like what this means, what I should be considering, for people who want to go and learn more. Cause I would love to just dive into this, but I know there's other things that we want to cover on this podcast.
Yeah, I think both my answers are like just reach out to us.
Yeah.
Like I don't have some place I can point as a great source of truth. There's a couple very cool like data solutions out there that are semi open source to see what volume of things are moving through what ports. But I think that high quality information and how to put it this way, I'll know a lot more in January what the best way to navigate tariffs if you don't want to change or have to work with the same manufacturer in some part of the world. And then we are already actively working on kind of Canada, US based and Mexico based alternatives across the board on being vetted and high quality alternative suppliers for our clients.
Yeah. Okay. Makes sense. That's totally fair. It's hard to give a comprehensive,
Yeah, it's like
stamp of approval.
we're 2 weeks in, like this.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep. Lot that the future will hold for us, I'm sure. So let's talk about, because obviously I've been talking about a lot of supply chain. It's what we're going to be centralized on, but I would love to hear your take on how it relates to retention, because we've been talking more about ops and the logistical side of things. But I know that this audience always values tying it back. So how do you think, when you're seeing how brands are once they're optimizing their supply chain and really get it to a place where it's humming and it's working for the brand, how would you best define or share with our audience, like you're sitting in this special seat where you get to obviously be acknowledging and advising these brands? How are they tying, supply chain, something that maybe you wouldn't traditionally tie back to customer retention, that's usually, a sales or a marketing or just a go to market functions, you know KPI? How do you see the two being related?
Yeah, it's a great question. And we spent a lot of time thinking about retention when I was at Seed, like that our hero product you can only buy as a subscription, right? So have quite a lot of knowledge here. The easiest the opposite of a subscription is a stock out,
Yeah.
right? So I think the most obvious like negative impact to retention is um, not having the product in stock that your customers want or want to buy. So that's like the most obvious one. I think one that is like really popped up more frequently. I'm curious. I don't know if it's like the number is going up or the press is increasing its interest on this. Is like the idea of recalls
Mm,
and like the damage that does to a brand and let's say the lack of proactive quality controls or quality assurance or quality management systems that are in place or embedded in these supply chains. I think a lot of brands sell fast and break things and grow really quickly, and then they realize their labels are very far from what it is they're actually making, or they actually don't know that that's what's happening, or they haven't diligenced their supply chain that's grown very fast in a very short period of time and haven't put the proper systems in place to maintain or control those things. And then something terrible happens. And we've luckily, most of our clients have come to us in a proactive way, but there are some other clients that have come to us that have like severely damaged or hurt their customers through a bad bacteria or poisoning someone or whatever, and that spreads on the internet like wildfire and can really put some significant dampers on your retention goals or on like really scaring your consumer base away. And it's hard to recover from because you want to be transparent with them on like this stuff happens and it did happen, but at the same time, we don't want you to panic that this will happen again.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And I think that's something that's very real, a real side of consumerism, right? Is like the diligence that you have to do, especially if it's something like the example you gave of like like something that's consumable product, or like an edible product that is like potentially poisoning someone, right? Or giving them a bacteria that you didn't know because you didn't check the supply chain.
and that's the
Or
most extreme level. Like I could argue
exactly.
it in like more nuanced, smaller ways. If you have a broken box or crappy packaging that just looks terrible, like there's so many more nuanced details of the product itself that customers will pick up on when you ship it to them, that I think all contribute at like different weights and levels to like that end retention number, right? And so yeah, Seed was totally savage about this in a really awesome way. Like we were meticulous about every moment of the customer experience and every layer of the materials of the components of the packaging and product that it like took to synthesize that finished goods and product upon arrival. So yeah, I think retention is like embedded in everything we do, honestly, but that's also just like the product. I think you could also argue there's other supply chain pieces in the customer service level, like returns and like making them feel very cared for, and how the product's improved when customers complain, stuff like that.
Yeah. And I imagine too, like sustainability as well, that comes up for a lot of brands these days of like whether it is written into your mission of wanting to be ethical and sustainable, or it's something that your consumers ask you for, want, and then you develop and write that into, your supply chain efforts. I think that's also, would you say that's also a big part of, when you're seeing what customers shop again, with the brands that they shop again with, they're really prioritizing sustainable efforts and want that as a consumer.
Yeah, I always try to make sure, we've tried to integrate sustainability into our services in many different ways over the last couple of years, and founders tend to be trying to survive. So it's a difficult thing for them to prioritize, but we also know that consumers care more and more about layer two and three pieces of what they're consuming and why it is that way, right? And so I actually do see a really exciting future where Pelagic could offer or support brands to be more transparent than any of their competitors on exactly how their supply chain works and where the raw components come from, how they've been diligenced or evaluated, or why they were selected in terms of a thoughtful ESG oriented way. So yeah, we're trying to integrate more and more accessible, sustainable solutions or offerings into our collective supply chain uh, handbook. But it's definitely a really hard thing because sustainability tends to cost more. And if it's a battle of cost savings and margin to keep the business afloat versus doing right by the planet or people, it's a difficult and nuanced decision for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. And yeah, it's something that I think is a very, very real decision to have to make. So I appreciate you sharing that, John. I also want to ask you, kind of just like table stakes of where are brands, in your opinion, kind of leaving things on the table when it comes to supply chain? Because we'll wrap up with this, and I think it'll be a nice kind of gut check for our audience, just to be like, oh, am I leaving something on the table? Is there something I need to assess? So yeah, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think the best way to state it very broadly is keep asking hard questions across the board of your supply chain. I think we work with a lot of founders who are inherently better at selling their products than they are understanding what's going on to how it's made, and they should be working with us or their director of operations to keep asking questions at every step and stage of growth and like unashamedly. And you're working with these humans that are critical, and I think people get very cautious or nervous to change anything in their supply chain. Like ain't broke, don't fix it, or you don't need to change anything because it's working. And we've seen so many projects or engagements where just like they never changed their provider, they didn't change their packaging partner, they didn't change their 3PL service, but just in doing a data-driven analysis and asking, why does everything cost this way? They saved like 30%, right?
Wow.
And then in like the worst, a better other like a scenario that shouldn't be scary either, we also help companies move entire pieces of their operation in a very high trust, efficient way for them to go realize those cost savings and level up their entire business. So keep asking those hard questions, and the right partners that in your supply chain will meet those questions the right way versus kind of burying them or hiding them or dodging them. Um, I think when you go and ask those questions, you'll discover that there's some right blend of what you're in charge of and what you're owning as a brand versus what you're letting someone else manage on your behalf. And so, what I would call that as a concern or a thing to look into is this idea of over bundling. So, there's like a lot of companies that have one manufacturer that does everything. And you're just not taking advantage of this like specialization concept that's very fundamental to economics, where it's very difficult for one operation and team to be good at everything. You should be breaking it apart into the best packaging, the best raw materials, the best manufacturing of the product itself, and then how it gets shipped and distributed to consumers. So would warn against that. And and there's a lot of really cool innovation that can be done in asking that question specifically, which kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier on like that make versus buy. I've seen some really, really incredible business models, even in comparison to seed and how large we grew that business, that are built on top of like an insourced, very innovative, scrappy warehouse or team producing products that have really never been done that way before that I'm excited to see more of in the future.
Yeah. Okay. Love it. Those are great answers. Thank you, John, for taking the time and being here with me today. I know it's been a lot of fun, and I know our audience is going to love this episode.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I could talk about this stuff for hours and hours and hours.
Hello, everyone. It's Mariah again. I am just popping in to say thank you for listening to today's episode. And I am so grateful that I have been able to be on this journey for the past couple of years with this podcast. It's been phenomenal to grow and see our community of thousands of listeners, see what you guys are up to, what you're learning, what you want to hear about next. So if you haven't already, please like and subscribe to the show so we can continue doing this. Leave us a review, let us know your thoughts. Follow us on our new social media channels and check out our newly launched website. If you or someone you know would be a great guest for the show, please do not be shy. Fill out the form that we have on there because those are some of my favorite interviews. And I will make sure that our new website is linked in the bio. It's retentionchroniclespodcast.com. And as always, let's give a warm shout out to our day one sponsor, Malomo. As you already know, Malomo is an order tracking platform that enables Shopify brands to take control of their transactional email and SMS through branded order tracking. What does that mean? That means you ditch those boring carrier tracking pages, the all white pages that have nothing on them but a tracking number and an update on the date of your estimated arrival, and swap those with pages that actually match your brand and can help you convert on some of your goals. Customers like you and I obsessively check that tracking page when we're looking for our order at our doorstep, an average of 4.6 times, if you can believe it. Yes, customers are going to that page 4.6 times. So don't waste out on all that customer engagement and instead send them to a page that converts in the way that you want it to. I am talking dealing with shipping issues, having cross sells and upsells, having your social media on there, your loyalty programs, anything that you can imagine. So if you want to learn more about how to do that, go to gomalomo.com. That's GOMALOMO.com. And if you didn't get that, don't worry. That website link for our sponsor, as well as our podcast website, are linked in our episode description. So with that, I will sign off and see you all next time.